If you've ever had a scary experience you'd like to have featured on the channel, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to send it my way. And of course, thank you. I have a strange, middle-of-nowhere kind of story that I wanted to send in, since you asked for them. Thank you. This happened in quite literally the middle of nowhere. The parts of the northern Midwest where it's just a highway and a handful of huge farmhouses in random spots. Endless roads flanked with fields that hadn't seen a sharpened lawnmower blade probably ever. The kind you have to have a CD to listen to, as antiquated as that may sound to some. I used to have to drive this way to get from my work's head office to one of our satellite locations. It wasn't in the middle of nowhere, but I had to go there every couple of months, and this was the quickest route by car. On this trip, I was driving and thinking about where the next gas station was, thinking about grabbing coffee and filling up the tank, when I noticed what looked like a lot of flashing lights, reds and blues lighting up the early evening like a grim disco. My first thought was that there had been a massive accident. There were several emergency vehicles there, which meant it was pretty serious. Of course, I started to think about how bad the injuries would have to be to have that many vehicles there. So, I slowed down, of course. And that's what you do, right? You don't barrel through emergency situations like a madman. You take it slow so that you don't end up hitting a cop or something. As I slow down, I notice that there are even more vehicles up the way. It looked like an entrance road to a farm property. There were officers and fire trucks at the entrance, but I could make out some more flashing lights through the trees. And as I got closer, I could see the officers all standing at the entrance, like they were setting up a perimeter or something. But they all looked kind of tense. More tense than you would expect. But here's where it goes from concerning to straight up horror. As I'm easing the car through this strange scene, trying to be respectfully slow, and maybe a little bit nosy, one of the officers locks eyes with me. It wasn't in a thanks for being considerate and slowing down kind of way. No, this guy sees me, pulls his firearm, and aims it straight at me. My heart obviously skips a beat and then decides to go for a sprint. I throw my hands up and stop the car, thinking maybe he mistook me for someone else. If an officer aims their weapon at you, you stop, right? You don't keep going, because that makes it look like you're running, and that makes the situation potentially deadly. But then, he shouts, "Keep driving! Go! Now!" All the while he kept his weapon trained on me. So, what do you do in this situation? My mind was saying that I was supposed to stop, but he was screaming at me to go. So, I very quickly decided to just do what he was telling me and kept driving. I slammed the gas pedal, not taking my eyes off the road ahead of me. As soon as I think I'm far enough, I glance at the rear view, and he's still standing there, gun in hand, and watching me drive off like he was making sure that I was really leaving. And just like that, the whole scene was behind me. Well, physically, at least. You don't just drive away from something like that unscathed. And I was still running on an adrenaline high. I had so many questions. What were they dealing with that made it a better choice to threaten some rando on the road than just let them slowly pass? Why did he escalate to drawing his weapon immediately, instead of just shouting at me to keep moving? What was so bad that seeing it meant I could not be allowed to stay? The rest of that drive, I was on autopilot, thinking that I was going to be pulled over and disappeared for something. My mind was stuck on the event, obviously, Because what the hell was that? Like, even if this was a major drug bust or takedown or something, you'd think they would just block it off and wave people through. And, like I mentioned, maybe yell at them to keep going in a stern but professional manner. Whatever it was, it very clearly had that officer shaken to his core to act like that. And I'm going to be honest here, no matter how much I want to know what it was, maybe some mysteries are best left unsolved. So, I used to be a dumb teenager. And, as a dumb teenager, I did dumb things. And looking back, I don't know how I'm alive. This was a while back, though, like the 80s. And maybe I just had that dumb teenager plot armor back then, but I don't know. It's not relevant, but it does help to explain why I did some of the things I did. There was a time where I would drive from my parents' house to my grandparents' house, which was a good 2-hour drive to the west through the middle of nowhere. I would do this drive weekly. I always told my parents I just wanted to spend time with my grandparents while they were still around, but honestly, there was this girl that lived across the way from them that I was very informally seeing. It was a very loose thing between us. Fun, but we both knew that it would be over in a few months. Anyways, one weekend, I was driving out that way when my car started to act up. Again, this was back in the 80s, and I wasn't much into cars beyond knowing how to change a tire. It made this weird sputtering, with a bit of steam coming out from the hood. I knew that steam meant that it was hot, so part of me thought I should stop for a while and just let it cool down. Again, I was not a car guy. As I stopped, I thought and tried to remember half of the things that my dad tried to tell me about cars and what was happening, but it never came to me. And that's when I saw a small farmhouse a bit down the road. I let the car roll until I was close to their driveway. It was still early afternoon, so I figured I would park it and see if these lovely people had a phone that I could use to call my dad and ask him what I should do. Worst case scenario, they tell me to beat it, and I have to just try and make it to another house in my questionable car. I walk up the driveway towards this old house. It was a bit run down, but again, it was the middle of nowhere, and there wasn't anyone there to enforce any sort of standard. If these people wanted their house to fall apart, then by God, they could allow it to fall apart. But as I got closer to the door, my mind went from maybe they just don't care to maybe they're dead. Because this place was very much not managed in any way. The windows were all broken, and the front door was misaligned, like the hinge had been broken off. I kind of laughed to myself, thinking, of course, I would break down in front of a creepy old abandoned farmhouse. But for some dumb reason, which does go back to me being dumb, I decided that I would check out the house, in case maybe they still did live there, and I was just being insensitive. So, I knocked. And, of course, there was no answer. So I figured I would just go ahead and check out the inside. Why? I don't really know. It sounded fun at the time, I guess, and it wasn't like I was going anywhere anytime soon. I pushed the door open and said hello like I was going to get an answer, and then stepped into the old house. It was honestly pretty creepy. All of the furniture was still there, as dusty as it was. There was an old TV set that was still there and plugged in, but it didn't work. I should know, I checked. I kept checking out the downstairs, thinking that there might be a neat treasure if I just kept looking, when I heard the soft sounds of footsteps above me. I kind of freaked out, thinking that there actually was someone there. And then I yelled out, "Hey, I'm really sorry for intruding. I'm just looking for a phone to call my folks. I'm having some car troubles. As if I hadn't just seen a decade's worth of dust resting on the couch. After not getting a response, I figured I would go upstairs and see what it was. So, I took each step with a slight debate about my life choices, and when I got to the top, I froze. As I was creeping in the hallway, I swear I started to hear what sounded like a creepy giggle, as cliche as that is. It was the giggle of a young child, and it was so very subtle that I almost thought I was imagining it. Then, I saw the light. What looked like a literal light coming from the room at the end of the hall. It seriously looked like there was a light on, but there was obviously no power in the house. I kept on, deciding I would check it out and see what it was coming from, but when I opened the door, there was nothing there. There was no light on in there, and there was nobody in the room. Around that time, I looked up into the room and noticed a large dresser with a full mirror attached. That was neat and all, but it was what I saw in the mirror that was more important. I saw myself, sure, but I could very clearly see what looked like a person, but completely black, like they were just a shadow. Now, there was no mistaking this for an optical illusion. It was 100% a person-shaped shadow behind me, and it was walking toward me from the end of the hallway. I spun around at light speed, thinking I was going to see this thing there, but it wasn't. Around that time, I figured that I was pushing my luck. I could handle the horrors of the living world, but when you start dealing with things from the other side, yeah, not so much. I took off down the hall, down the stairs, and out the front door, thinking that the quicker I got out of there, the better. I booked it down the driveway and jumped in my car, and by some miracle from above, it started just fine. I didn't have a single issue for the rest of the trip. It was almost like my car was supposed to break down right there so I could be scared witless by some freaky demon. I don't believe in fate like that, but it was one hell of a coincidence that I would have issues right in front of that creepy-ass house, only to not have them again after I left. To this day, I have never been back down that road. I kept going to my grandparents' house for a time after, but I found an alternative route. That experience chilled me to the core, and I have no idea what I encountered in that house. But I thank God that I never encountered it again. Hit the like button if you're enjoying these scary stories, and be sure to subscribe for more. Okay, so I have a pretty freaky story that honestly feels pretty unbelievable. I've been sitting on this story for a bit, because every time I think about it, I get a pretty major chill down my spine. Plus, I really don't know what the hell happened, and I don't think anyone is going to believe what I say. And that's fine. I'm not telling this to convince others, but I also don't want to be looked at like I'm crazy. I've heard others tell stories like this, and I've heard tons of these kinds of stories on YouTube channels like yours, but being the subject of one is a completely different feeling. So, here's how it went. I was driving back from a family visit, taking the back roads because I just personally enjoy the quiet and isolated areas. It's the kind of quiet where, if you turn the music off, all you hear is the motor rumbling. There is nothing out there, and I adore that fact. It was past midnight, as I had stuck around way later than usual, and while my mom wanted me to just sleep on the couch, I wanted to go home for whatever reason. I was regretting it a bit, and was thinking that I should have at least grabbed a cup of coffee before heading out, but it was what it was. I was driving down the road, and out of seemingly nowhere, this bright light floods the road. It honestly felt like a spotlight on a helicopter, but turned up to 11. My first thought was just that. a helicopter, thinking maybe the police were chasing someone and they thought that I was that person or something. So I stopped the car thinking that things were about to get crazy. And that's when I kind of glanced up through the windshield to look and see where this helicopter was. Which was the exact moment that I realized it wasn't a helicopter. In fact, I couldn't really tell what it was. My mind kind of struggled to place a shape over this form that was above me, but I could see that it was metallic and very reflective. I couldn't quite tell if it was circular or oblong, because it was moving in a weird way. I know that doesn't make sense, but it didn't feel like the movement was natural or patterned. It was like it was glowing, but by that I mean actually glowing. Not being lit up from the inside or anything, but the outline of the shape was glowing. It was shining a light down on the road, pretty much at me, but it was seemingly just hovering beyond that. It took me a couple of moments to realize it, but while I was staring at it, everything was silent. By that, I mean that my car had shut off, and that this thing wasn't making any sound whatsoever. There was no air movement, no whooshing or whirring, just silence. Eerie silence. For a few moments, I just sat there, frozen, my brain trying to process whether or not I could run away from this, or if I was about to succumb to some kind of painful death. I wanted to be scared, but it was more like my thoughts were TV static. A sense of anxiety, but unmoving, and I wasn't able to really form actual thoughts. Again, I know that this sounds weird, but as I was staring at this thing, it felt like I was staring at an old TV with the static just playing out behind my eyes. I just felt mentally stuck for several moments, until I seemed to regain control of my brain and shake my head. I literally shook whatever that was off, and when I blinked, it was just gone. There were no more lights, no UFO, nothing. Just me sitting in my turned-off car in the middle of the road surrounded by darkness. I just sat there for a couple of moments thinking, what the hell was that, and what just happened? I started my car up without issues, and I kept on going, just driving down the road and trying to get home at like 1:30 in the morning. The whole event lasted almost no time at all, like literally. It was less than 5 minutes between my car shutting off and me getting back on the road. By the end of this, nothing really happened to me, I think. But for all I know, a ton could have happened in those moments where my brain filled with pins and needles. I have no idea though, but I'm no worse for wear, so if anything did happen, it doesn't seem to have affected me. It was a crazy night, and I've literally only ever told one person, my brother, and he told me I was nuts. So I've just kept this kind of thing to myself. I know what I saw, and I know what I felt, and I know that it wasn't just me imagining something crazy. My name is Bill. I was driving my black Jaguar coupe home late one night several years ago. I work as a medical doctor at a hospital in Georgia, and I work long hours. Often the schedule is busy, and the work is hectic. And even though I enjoy what I do for a living, I was happy that I was driving home now to spend a full weekend with my family. The road I was traveling on was a dark and long one, but it was thankfully fully lit up by the full moon. The full moon sure helped me in avoiding a big black bear that suddenly decided to cross the road in front of me. I put on my brakes and let the big guy pass unharmed. I watched the bear go across the road and out of sight again as I continued on my journey home, breathing a sigh of relief that neither of us were killed. It suddenly started to drizzle as I put on my windshield wipers. I was driving for about 20 minutes when, up ahead, I could see a red Toyota Camry with its emergency lights flashing on the side of the road. I hoped that there wasn't an accident up ahead, because there were animals who crossed the road without warning that could cause crack-ups at any time, like that bear that I had just avoided. When I got closer to the scene, I slowed my car down. I was concerned at first that it was an accident, but seeing none, I was relieved. Then, suddenly, seeming out of nowhere, a lady jumped out and was frantically waving for me to stop the car and help her. I could see that this lady was a nun. She was elderly, wearing round glasses on her face with a full nun's robe and a gold cross around her neck. "Do you need any assistance, sister?" I asked her politely after I pulled my car up behind hers and stopped it. The lady, almost pleading, was telling me that she was stranded with no cell phone signal to call a tow truck, and she was so happy that I stopped for her, since she thought her car battery had died on her. I almost told her that I would go back to town to call a tow truck for her vehicle, because I didn't want to get out of my car on a rainy and dark night to help a person I didn't know. But this was a nun, so what harm could it be, right? I then got out of my car and walked over to her Toyota Camry, telling her I would check it out for her. When I got in front of the car, I asked her to pop open the hood, so I could look inside of it. When the nun did, I could see that the car battery had green mold on it, telling me that this nun indeed would need a new battery soon. I was just about to tell her this as I looked over at her in surprise. She was staring and smiling devilishly at me. As she quickly took off her round glasses, untied her bun of blonde hair, letting it fall loose and long all around her, and then let her robe quickly fall to the asphalt road. I was tricked. This lady was not a nun at all, but a highway robber. A blonde, bosomy, and shapely one at that, wearing a black mini dress and pointing a snub-nosed handgun right at my stomach. She looked down, admiring her figure for a moment before looking back up at me. "Not a bad figure for an older woman, huh?" She laughed. A touch of actress Donna Mills with a taste of Dolly Parton. As she said this, she made herself laugh even harder. She then looked at me seriously, thinking to herself as she nodded, her head smiling at me. "I was going to kill you, but I can see that you're a hard-working Joe. Doctor, I see. I saw your license plate that says so over there," she said to me, pointing at my car. She then told me to hand over my wallet, which I did. I was under the gun, so I had to if I wanted to live through this. When I handed her my wallet, she took the money quickly, and then tossed it back to me just as quickly without even looking up at me. "Wow, thanks, lover. $1,000 in cash," she said, quickly counting the bills. She then stared at me, smiling. "I guess it's you that should be thanking me since I'm letting you live and allowing you to keep your car to boot," she said, laughing. "Toodaloo, love, and don't even think about calling the police, 'cause I'll be long gone by then," she said, smiling as she quickly got into her Toyota Camry and roared off into the night. I tried to get her license plate number, but she was smart. She didn't have any license plates on her car. When she was gone, I drove my Jaguar immediately to the police station and told them everything that happened to me that night. I even gave a description of the lady to the police artist. Unfortunately, the lady who robbed me was never seen again. In thinking back, I should have called the so-called nun a tow truck when I got back to town, instead of getting out of my vehicle to help her that night and making myself vulnerable to attack. So, people, always go with your gut feeling. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. I learned that lesson the hard way on that dark and rainy night several years ago. I love traveling and being on the road, which means that I've seen parts of the country, the US, that many people don't end up seeing. I've met some real characters on the way. When I was young, I watched a TV show on road trips along 66 and wanted to go. Fortunately for me, I found someone who also shares my passion and is willing to travel the country with me. My fiancé, John, and I decided to go on the journey together. We packed up our RV with supplies and made the long journey on the road. Unfortunately, many of those places are now deserted. I've gone through Texas. Amarillo and Shamrock are two of my favorite places. One place that stood out to me with the historical buildings, and I think has the oldest cemetery on Route 66, is Allen Reed. It isn't a ghost town. I'm not sure of the exact number of residents, but there are still people living there. There's only one business that remains. We saw a couple of residents walking around, so I guess we'll have to take their word for it. Many of the older buildings are maintained by a community group who prevents the buildings from collapsing. It's pretty cool if you ask me. Like many of these places, one thing you notice is just how quiet it is, and just how it is so deserted. We were taking photos of the different buildings in the cemetery and any of the abandoned houses that we saw. We didn't want to trespass or overstep our welcome, so we made sure these places weren't lived in anymore. Now, I want to say that we never felt like we weren't safe or unwelcomed by any means, and we didn't feel like we were being watched, threatened, etc. We looked at some of the photos on our phones, but also took professional cameras and video footage with our GoPros. Once we collected it all, we said our goodbyes and continued on with our adventure. I won't bore you with the full details of our trip. Basically, we had a lot of pictures and video footage. And once we got back home and finished unpacking everything, we started to go through all of the pictures to find our favorite ones to go into a photo album we would send out to our family. I know that we could post them online, but we have quite a few elderly family members who don't really have an online presence. We got up to the pictures from Allen Reed, and we noticed dust on the lens that could give the impression of a ghost orb. It kind of annoys us when we see people say that every picture has a ghost, when we know what it is. I kept finding several pictures and complained to John. He looked over my shoulder and was far quieter than usual. I asked him what was wrong and he pointed to the screen. There was a face looking at us from one of the windows. I zoomed in to see what did look like a face. Unfortunately, it didn't quite look human. The eyes were too big, and the mouth looked twisted. I'm a skeptic through and through, and I don't believe in ghosts or the supernatural. I said that it could have been a local who wanted to hide but wanted to see what we were doing. John then said the face didn't look human. And I had to agree with him. It did not look friendly. I went through the rest of the pictures. There were some that were fine, except that same face kept showing up in different places. It got stronger and more defined in the cemetery, and John and I stared at each other. We've been to abandoned buildings and supposedly haunted places before with no issues with any of our equipment. I don't know what will happen here. We checked the video footage and it showed what John thought was a shadow figure, but for me it looked like branches or shadowing from something else nearby. I don't know what it was. It was unsettling to know that something could be there. We did eventually manage to get some photos without the face or the shadow figures standing out. I'm still on the fence about what we actually saw in the pictures, though. I looked online and spoke to some friends to see if they'd ever had a similar encounter in Allen Reed, but I couldn't find any. So, what was it? I don't know. Oh, if you want to go there, now would be a good idea. I heard recently that the last business might be packing up soon, so I suggest heading out to Allen Reed. But do keep an eye out for the weird face and shadow figures, I guess. I don't remember hearing about any local ghost stories or anything, but yeah, that's our story. Not sure if it's good enough to feature in a video, but I hope you have a good one, as I am a big fan of yours. So that, my friends, was a collection of some true scary middle-of-nowhere stories. Stories that happen in places devoid of civilization, where we truly do not live in a society. Stories that happen in the middle of nowhere. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 of these involved driving. That's interesting. Though I guess, if you're in the middle of nowhere, you're probably not walking to your destination, huh? Yeah. Makes sense, actually. Yeah. I have family who live out in the middle of nowhere. In middle of nowhere, Kansas. And I kind of like going out there. I like being out there in the middle of the night, whenever because there's no street lights. So if the lights are off, you can just go outside and stare at the sky, and it's very bright, very pretty. Very, very enjoyable. Patience and I have also driven from our area of the world to Colorado, so that's eastern Kansas to Colorado, all the way through Kansas. And we've definitely been in the middle of nowhere, I can tell you that much. There's a lot of middle of nowhere in Kansas. Though surprisingly, I don't think any of these were in Kansas. I don't get a lot of stories from Kansas. I've actually done a Kansas video, though, interestingly enough. And whenever I do get stories from Kansas, especially ones that are like Overland Park or like Kansas City, it makes me giddy because I've lived in those areas, so I know what it's like. So it's kind of cool. I don't know. I'm a weird person, so saith some of you. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed these stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button, as it helps. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, consider subscribing, of course. And if you're feeling ever so bold, go to the comments down below. Let me know how you're doing, how your day is going. Do you live in the middle of nowhere, and have you ever experienced anything like this? You can always send it my way, of course, as theravendreams.com, just the website for the channel. Or in the description, there's also a section, there's a link there that says, like, submit your story or send your story or something like that. You can click there. Yeah, good stuff. There's also a link to a merch store down there. I'm thinking about doing, not mid-rolls. Mid-roll's the wrong word, but like a mid thingy where I tell you guys about my merch store, because people have been like, hey, when are you going to have merch? And I'm like, I've had merch for years. Haven't had a new design for a little bit, but there is merch down there. I use T-Chip. I try to go as cheap as possible. I think like my shirts are like $15 versus some people who like run their merch for like $30. I don't want to make a profit off merch. I just want like you guys to wear my shirts or have stickers or stuff. And that's why everyone who got a postcard from me also got stickers. I have a few I need to send. All the ones I have to send are international right now. So if you've sent me a postcard and haven't gotten one back, please send me an email, because I have sent out everything that is continental US. If you have sent it from the US and you haven't gotten one back, we need to talk. So send me an email, astheravendreams@gmail.com. Yeah. Well, that's it, friends. Hope you have a beautiful day, beautiful rest of your day, beautiful rest of your week. Hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until next time, much love, and of course, sleep well.